With the cast size of 18 queens, All-Stars 10 is quite literally the biggest letdown of the many All-Stars. I think it had the potential to be amazing. It featured long-awaited queens to jump back in the ring like Acid Betty, Denali, Dia Betty, Nicole Paige Brooks from Atlanta, Georgia. It featured some unexpected bangers like Dia Betty, Irene the Alien, and Tina Burner, and so on and so forth. Then the season took an interesting twist. What if we did a regular All-Stars but segmented it into smaller non-elimination brackets so that we could showcase their talent and their abilities and then smoosh them all together into a couple of competitive episodes that will be the toughest of all time. But we're really just a talent show, a Snatch game, and then a lip-sync smackdown, which are pretty standard Drag Race challenges. In theory, it takes the best parts of the All-Stars we liked, the ones where people didn't go home and we got to see their artistry and their skills, but then it removes all the stuff that we didn't like about those non-elimination moments, like it just lingering on for way too long, and then it streamlines kind of everything, and then it takes the elements of social game and producer meddling and streamlines that all into one cohesive thought. Or at least on paper it does. But there were so many mechanical issues that needed to be fine-tuned before this even went into pre-production. This video has no intention of solving any of those problems. As a matter of fact, this is going to be quite the opposite. Instead, this video asks the question, what if All-Stars 10 was a massive elimination season? Structurally, I'm gonna be honest, this season imploded on itself with every scenario that I ran. I did 3 or 4 different versions of this script before settling on ultimately what I thought the structure was going to be. All of these challenges up until bracket 2 are in small groups of 6. They are meant to accommodate groups of 2 or 3. That was a disaster to put together because I didn't want to change the structural integrity of any of these challenges and just leave them as they are. It's like trying to turn a top into a bottom. It's just too tight of a fit. And no matter how much VHS cleaner you use, they're just not gonna open up enough to accommodate the girth that is about to get inside. So formatting to this capacity was an actual nightmare, but I think I got there. I had to make some compromises that I didn't like, and I had to make some decisions that I didn't like, but I was trying to put myself in the mentality of someone who was working on this show. So let's reimagine All-Stars 10 if it had eliminations. Here are the rules of this game. Rule number 1, regardless of how this entire video shakes out, you will be adults in the comments, and if you can't do that, please scroll away. Rule number 2, we are going in with the assumption that Ginger and Georges are the endgame players. However we have to hold their hand to get there is how we have to hold their hand. I didn't necessarily set up the challenges in a route that accommodates them, but they were a factor of consideration because that's how it was in the original version of this. And so their handling is with some kid gloves. We all know that each one of these All-Stars are overproduced from conception, so that was the mentality I had going into it. This is not my own fantasy world where I wanted it to shake out a certain way. I tried to predict how the producers would manage the season. Rule 3, this is a massive landmark season, so we're gonna kind of combine everything together. There will be some Rue turn to form. Each week, Rue will pick a top 2 who will both get stars, which will matter in the finale. And then Rue will choose a bottom 2 who will have to lip sync for their life to stay. I did not want to deal with group voting or lip sync assassins or lip sync for your legacy. It was all just too much every time that I ran those scenarios. I would love to rejudge this in my own fantasy at some point, so if any of you are interested in that, let me know because I will do so. And the last thing is that we will be doing this as a split premiere because that was just the easiest way to manage 18 queens. I do think that 18 queens could work in an All-Star season, but not with 12 episodes. It needed 4 or maybe 5 more episodes to be a properly good season for this bulk of cast. I also don't feel like the lip sync smackdown should have been the end cap of this season. That should have been the return moment. And then Snatch game. And then something else, like a ball. And then a talent show. And then mixed in with the finale. So here's how I think that this would shake out. Group 1, we have Aja, Bosco, Irene, Acid, Cynthia, Phoenix, Olivia, Deja, and Alyssa. The challenges and the runways will be the exact same as they were originally. Except this week, it will be 9 instead of 6. Episode 1 is Winner Winner Chicken Dinner. Aja and Irene are the top 2 this week, as they were in the original episode. I know that I'm really branching out on a limb here, but I think it made the most sense that the 2 of them won. It sets up an interesting way to start out the season. Plus, Aja has lip sync in a premiere multiple times now, in season 3, in season 8, and now this one. Sets up a nice little bow end on her storyline on Drag Race. And Irene was genuinely such a banger that she deserved this win. Based on the original assignment, I could absolutely see Olivia, Deja, and definitely Phoenix in the bottom 3. Because Phoenix got that critique that she wasn't giving star quality, I think they would use that to bolster her position in the bottom, and plus I think she was cast to be an early out. And I think the person they would use to snipe her out would be Deja, because she really missed the mark on that runway. And that makes Phoenix the very first out of this season. She could return to the finale as the wild card, but spoiler alert, she won't be picked. Episode 2 is Group 2, and their challenge is Star Booty the Rebooty. I know it's kind of weird to have a premiere as a rusical, but also this wasn't really a rusical. And this group features Ginger, Georges, Denali, Daya, Nicole, Carrie, Mistress, Lydia, and Tina. This challenge would need to be retooled just a smidge, since it does have 3 more players in it than originally, but I don't think that would be that difficult. I would anticipate the high placers to be Georges and Lydia, immediately setting them up as endgame players. And what we typically see in the current modern All-Stars is Episode 1 is a random player that gets a win. Think like Kahana getting that very first win. And then starting in Episode 2 is the producer pick, like a Jimbo, like a Georges, the one that is clearly going to get favored through the competition and scooted to the end. And then we see their cards right away. They're not very good about hiding these things. Georges and Lydia both get stars, and the bottom 3 would be, in a very uncreative manner, just because I don't see the others scoring anywhere else but safe, Mistress, Nicole, and Tina. The lip sync song is Texas Hold'em. And with Mistress and Nicole already establishing from the get-go that they had the same last name, that maybe they would have some alliance that Mistress had no intention of actually locking in on, I think it would be an interesting way to already establish that Mistress is someone that the edit is not going to trust very much. Use her as a tool, as a device if you will, to establish this storytelling early, since the bracket system is very different. And on top of it, they were both underwhelming in this runway, so it would make sense to put them in the bottom. And Mistress sends Nicole packing, sadly. Nicole Paige Brooks from Atlanta, Georgia, could be the wildcard queen, but she's not gonna be. Episode 3 is The Merge, with a very easy to understand, easy to execute design challenge with a storytelling twist. This challenge will be wicked good. This is not only a good way to combine both groups together and sectioning off that classic design challenge as an early season challenge, but it also helps segment how massive this group is into duos very early. And to make the group pairings a little more dynamic and interesting, Group 1 and Group 2 have to choose a partner from the other group. So we have in Group 1, Aja, Bosco, Irene, Acid, Cynthia, Olivia, Deja, and Alyssa. And then in Group 2, we have Ginger, Georges, Denali, Daya, Carrie, Mistress, Lydia, and Tina. And as an homage to All Stars 1, both teams have to choose a paddle from a box. If the paddles match up names, then they will be paired together. I love a little callback moment, and I think this would be cute. These are the pairs based on my own expectations for how these would go. Bosco and Daya end up together because they're very good friends. Acid and Ginger wanted to work together originally, and so I think they would be first picking each other. Irene and Mistress, I think, would choose each other simply because they had already worked together in a season. Round 2, Aja and Denali would pick each other, because I would assume that everyone that they wanted to work with was already chosen in round 1. Olivia and Tina end up together, incidentally, perhaps. Deja and Georges end up together, also likely incidentally. And maybe the people that they chose in round 1 didn't choose them, so in round 2 they just pick someone from their season. And then round 3 would be the group of people that I think others would not necessarily want to work with for storytelling or design. So we would have Cynthia and Lydia together, and Alyssa and Carrie. Part of me was a little malicious cigarette goat tree about this, because the story potential between Alyssa and Carrie, having already lip synced once before, Alyssa going home and then them getting paired up again in a challenge that they are both objectively not good at. Alyssa with the storytelling and Carrie with the sewing. And so you put them together and it's literally a potion of bad stuff. And not to be all tinfoil hat or anything, but I genuinely believe that this challenge was always in the cards for Ginger to win. She has a strong connection with Wizard of Oz. She told a story about some ruby slippers. She has a Glinda number in the Vegas show. This was always meant to be her win, I think. Plus, it's a design challenge with storytelling. Storytelling being the first part, comedy being the first part, the most important part. Come on. Also, if she was with Acid, I think they would come up with something even more interesting story-wise, since they both contributed heavily to their own individual groups with the storytelling. And even if their costuming wouldn't be the best, I think their story would be enough to make up for it. Plus, Ginger needs to be set up as a front runner early, and so her and Acid get the top 2 spots and get stars each. Knowing this story of Carrie and Alyssa makes my little producer hat tingle with excitement because they are the perfect grouping for a bottom 2 placement, story-wise and challenge-wise. And Drag Race loves to put people together again in a lip sync just to see who will ultimately reign supreme. The lip sync song is Defying Gravity, and I think Alyssa is cooked here. Carrie would be a more interesting watch, even if she's not the most dynamic lip syncer in the world. And this being a redemption moment, it establishes that Carrie truly is the stronger lip syncer of the two and that she didn't just win because of a money gun fail, even though it could have been that. Alyssa is next out, and she could be the wild card queen. I'm just gonna let y'all know now that she's not going to be. Episode 4 is a supersized Snatch game in the style of season 15. This group has so many more unfunny queens than the one time we saw Snatch game with this group. However, it does have Deja, who was the sole winner of her Snatch game, so the pressure is on, and it has Denali, who is almost the winner of her Snatch game, but Mick was just a little better. However, the panel was not featuring either one of these divas in their original run, neither Deja nor Denali. So I don't expect them to necessarily be at the top of the list of the one who's gonna win, but I do think they would be the actual funniest next to Ginger. Now, originally, I thought that Daya could have won and should have won her Snatch game, but the panel wasn't feeling this, and this is not my caramel mocha fantasy, so Daya won't be winning Snatch game. Ginger will be the winner, but I've made a little twist on this that there will be a top and a bottom queen from each group. And so to set this up the way that I think would be best for storytelling purposes, Group 1 Snatch game is Aja, Bosco, Irene, Olivia, Ginger, Georges, and Mistress, with Ginger being the top queen of this group and Mistress being the bottom queen. And then Group 2 is Acid, Cynthia, Deja, Denali, Daya, Carrie, Lydia, and Tina, where Denali is the top queen and Cynthia is the bottom queen. Denali and Ginger both get stars, where Mistress and Cynthia lip sync once again. And the lip sync song is Who's Zoomin' Who, the a cappella remix. And I still stand on business that that was a terrible lip sync choice. They should have just done the regular version and not the a cappella. I think that Cynthia doesn't have much of a chance beating quite literally anybody in this cast to a lip sync. Maybe Carrie, and that's a stretch. And she is out this week and will not be the wild card queen either. Episode 5 is the talent show. I really wanted to rip a page out of España 2's Drag Race handbook and put the talent show as the merge episode, but there were so many queens, and trying to figure out what lip sync dance number combo that each one of these queens were gonna do and how they were gonna share how they should win the crown this time was kind of mentally taxing, and so I just put it later. This was pre-weight loss for Mistress, so I don't think that she would do her Ozempic routine. I do think that she would do something that wasn't dynamic or interesting. Bosco is definitely one of the top 2 queens because I know that she would do another burlesque routine that would knock everybody out of the park. Like, wouldn't just hit the balls, would hit the audience out of the park too. Super Smash Bros style. And I'm gonna make an unexpected move here and give the other win to Olivia. I imagine that whatever she did would be really spectacular and stunning, kind of in a Monet Exchange kind of a way in All-Stars 7. One that was just kind of breathtaking and people were not ready for. In my fantasy, Aja did really well, but the judges were not featuring it very much. And the bottom 2 remains Lydia because, unlike in the original talent show, where she had 7 months to prepare and get ready for that, she only had maybe a week or two to get ready, and so it would be just as weak as the first time around with those puppets. And it would probably be even weaker this time, and so I fear that she is in the bottom too. Other notable mentions, I think that Carrie would be really interesting in the challenge, but not on the runway. And I think that Mistress would be blah in the challenge and blah on the runway, because her styling choices this season were a big head scratcher. They lacked a lot of taste for some reason, which was odd for Mistress. I do wonder if in this universe, if Lydia and Mistress would start to establish this mother-daughter thing that they did in the original pink bracket. If they do that, I could see this storyline already here of Lydia and Mistress lip syncing together so that the daughter sends mother home. And so I'm going to stick with that, even if it's a little boring to stick with what happened originally. The lip sync song is Guess, where Lydia wipes the floor with Mistress's hair. Mistress can be the wildcard queen, and I'm gonna stick an asterisk next to her name. And I know it's a gag that she's out at this point, but Mistress only lasted 5 competitive episodes in All Stars 10, so it makes sense that her run would be about the same here. Episode 6 is the 8 ball. The queens are given completely random materials of 8 and must construct a high fashion and couture look. This is kind of a worst nightmare situation for someone like Ginger, who, after all these times of being on All Stars, did not know how to sew. It also doesn't bode well for queens like Aja, who have a great design aesthetic and great references, but the judges never connect to them for some reason. She's never on the dossier to do well in these things, even if we as the audience respond positively to them. And I think that Carrie is in massive danger here because her sewing skills are suspicious at best. I think Tina undeniably gains the win here because she knows what she's doing on a sewing machine and she would bang out something incredible. I could also potentially see Daya getting a win here just based off of what she tailored for the Wicked Good runway and how high scale that was. However, Drag Race also loves when a queen is low and then is high the following week and gets a win, so I could easily see them being a little dull and giving Lydia the win this week since she was in the bottom the previous. And so, Lydia and Tina both snatch up the win. Again, kind of boring, and I know. The bottom 2 is Ginger Minj because this is not on her alley, and Carrie because we all have eyeballs and saw what she made. That braiding was a mess. I think that Aja would be bottom 3 but would not quite place in the bottom because she would probably reference something that Rue had no idea what she was talking about, and then they'd put her in the bottom because Rue didn't get it, even if it was perfection. I think that Ginger having a mid-season stumble is better for her overall trajectory if she's always meant to go to the end. And so her being in the bottom with Carrie at this point helps start creating that sympathetic edit for her that I think was desperately missing in her original run. She just comes in, gets her hand held all the way through challenges, and never really has a stumble moment. It's not like many of the other queens who won who had a little stumble moment, almost went home, and we're rooting for them a little harder. There's no fear factor in Ginger not winning, so we don't feel electric about her winning. This helps generate that. Lydia and Tina both get stars, and I know that I'm not being inventive or demure with these right now, but that's legitimately how I see this panning out. And Ginger and Carrie lip sync to Love Sensation, which absolutely comes off like something that Ginger would curb stomp in. Carrie had no real chance going against Ginger in any universe, no matter what the song was. Ginger sweeps his lip sync, and Carrie is out. She likely could come back as a wildcard queen, so we put an asterisk next to her name as well. Episode 7 is the Golden Bitchler Challenge, yet another duo challenge. This cast size is getting a little more manageable for the challenges that are at hand, but it's still a little bigger than what the original challenge called for. Mother, I'm producing the show again. Our pairs are, just based off of how I think the production would try and set this up, Aja and Olivia, because they're friends. Bosco and Daya, because they're friends. Ginger and Georges, because they're trying to establish a storyline. Irene and Tina. Acid and Denali. And Deja and Lydia. The judges loved Ginger in this original performance, even if I thought that it was familiar and referential to other improvs that Ginger's done. And since the goal for me as a fake producer in this fake reality is to help Ginger scoot towards the finale, she also gets the win and a star here. And because she was just in the bottom last week, it's another bottom to top storytelling device that they love to use. I think Georges by default would look so much weaker next to Ginger in this challenge because improv is not George's ministry at all. And so I'm gonna put Georges in the bottom. And the other bottom two that I'm gonna take a little swing at being here is Deja. Simply because the judges were really not feeling her improv in Murder on the Dance Floor. They didn't seem to connect with her or her runways in any of her orange bracket run. And none of them made them feel like Vanessa Hudgens and go, ooh. The other top two this week, I struggled between Irene and Daya. I feel like Irene would be very strong here, and we already saw that the judges liked what Daya did. I do think that that was to help scoot her into the next round over anything, because in my French Vanilla Fantasy, that original win was Daya and Denali. But that's not what the producers wanted. Part of me really wants to give it to Irene because I feel like her paper doll runway would be next level, where I don't think that Daya's was that interesting. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put my own thought process into this one just a smidge. Georges and Deja then lip sync to Mama Used to Say, and Georges sends Deja back to the house. I think that Deja could be a wildcard queen, but I'm not anticipating her or putting any type of star next to her name to do so. By this point, I think anybody with eyeballs could kind of see what the writing on the walls is and what the end goal is going to be. But I do feel like there's a little bit of surprise that someone else could snag the ultimate win. Episode 8 is then the Rappin roast. I highly imagine that this would be completely reformatted to just be a regular roast. And that's honestly what I would have preferred, but that's not what happened. And the parameters of this assignment, Georges needs a win after bottoming last week. And in my ultimate fantasy, Aja is also very high because I think she would aggressively compliment the room in the same way that she aggressively complimented Valentina in that moment of saying, "You're beautiful, you're perfect, you look like Linda Evangelista." I feel like that would eat. They would probably need a lot longer of time to roast each other, so this could be a much more interesting episode with so many more queens, with so many more reads. This could be dynamic as hell. And with Aja kind of being in a safe run, it is a good place to start her at an incline. While I also didn't agree with Georges' original high placement, the judges wanted her there, so there she will be with Aja, both of them getting stars. In this group, I believe that Acid would probably struggle the most with the rap part over the roasting. I also wonder if Denali would be able to keep up with the roasting aspect, even if I think that her rap would be fire. The judges also didn't seem to like Lydia's performance and made this bogus critique that they couldn't understand what she was saying. All of us and Chapel could understand what she was saying. So I do wonder if they would risk her being in the bottom again. Plus in an elimination style, I don't know if they would be as complimentary to her runways. The other person I see struggling the hardest in this challenge would be Olivia. Roasting is not in her wheelhouse at all, as we saw in season 13. And yeah, she was playing a nice girl character and she was more realized by now, but I wonder if she would maybe go a little too mean and it would just lack the funny. And I also just don't know if she would be able to incorporate rapping and roasting into one cohesive package. Olivia's not really on the vision board, and I think what Drag Race also likes to do is show one friend succeeding and their star rising in a competition, while their friend starts to flounder and fail and their star falls. Drag Race does this all the time. One of my most classic examples of this would be Farrah and Valentina, where Valentina is really high in that girl group challenge and Farrah ultimately goes home. It's clunky, but Drag Race relies on this trope again and again, and so I think it makes the most sense that these two people who are friends would be used as storytelling devices to bolster one's position over the other. And with Olivia potentially going home, it locks in Aja a little more into the competition that she's got a goal for why she wants to win, that she's winning it for her sister. And Drag Race also loves to see that. What I see happening is Lydia in the bottom lip syncing with Olivia, Too Hot to Go, and Lydia sending Olivia home. This is not only how I think it would go, but also having Lydia perform one of Chapel's songs after opening for Chapel, and that being a pretty big storyline. I think they would rely on that and connect those dots together. Episode 9 is then Murder on the Dance Floor. This is a significantly bigger cast than originally, so a lot of roles would need to be adjusted and changed and added in. I imagine that both Michelle and I think it was Carson who was there would both probably be turned into queen roles that had a volley improv moment with RuPaul. And an important layer of this challenge is volleying with Ru. So if Rue doesn't like you, you're in trouble. And I think we can sort of parse out who Rue connected with and didn't connect with based off of how she talked to them in the workroom. Of this cast, Rue did not seem to have fun with Aja in that challenge. And Rue did not connect much with Acid Betty, on top of the fact that Acid was a little combative with Rue, saying that she deserved wins and Rue didn't give them to her, and Rue sort of falling back into, yeah, you could blame me for that. Rue also doesn't seem to connect with Denali at all and practically ignores her when she's in a room. And I don't think that Rue connects with Tina's humor very much. And while I don't think that Lydia would do great here, and I think it would be a lot of levels of cringe, Rue would just be so happy to be in the same set as her second favorite twink that she could siphon energy off of, that Lydia would be safe here. So this week, I'm gonna be super boring and say that the tops are Irene and Bosco once again. Bosco for that eye thing, and Irene for that incredible vocal switch that she did in the middle of that improv. And I think that Ginger would be a very high top 3 placement. And I imagine that the bottoms would be Acid and Tina, since they both seem to be the ones that Rue connects with the least next to Denali. I just realized that Acid and Tina are both references. That was unexpected and unintentional. However, I do think that Acid's runway would help solidify her into a safe position because they also don't feature Denali or her runways. And so I think Denali would have to lip sync against Tina, the two season 13 girls going at it. The lip sync is Murder on the Dance Floor, and in this song, I see this as one that Denali would choreograph very well and obliterate Tina Burner in. Tina also makes some really strange decisions while she's lip syncing, and I've never quite understood some of the thought process that goes into why she translates one lyric into doing something completely non sequitur. And I think the judges also feel that same way. So Tina is out here. Episode 10 is Stagecooch. The room will be divided into 3 country groups. Now originally, both of the songs that were given were Camp as Hell. And so I imagine that the third song would be Camp as Hell, even though there are girls in this cast who are cunty. And I think some of these girls would do better if a song was cuntier, but I don't imagine that Drag Race would be that kind to them. And now, in my opinion, the original winners were Denali and Acid. I thought they were the best in both the challenge and on the runway. Acid Betty's look, where it had those LED strips between those tiles of square glass, was so visually interesting, but the judges didn't want to give her that win because they really wanted to give it to Ginger. And since this is not my fantasy, and because this season I've constructed to be a little dull where someone bottoms and then they're high again the next week, we're doing that again. Here we are, besties. This original season was dull, so the revamp of it is also dull. I think that one of my big bulletins while constructing this is that the producers did a bad job managing this season, and so I too tried to go in badly managing this season, because this is not my fantasy, it's what I think would actually happen. Ginger and Denali are the top 2 in the challenge because I think they would be the best then and now. This gives Ginger a 4th star and gives Denali that low to high route that so many other girls so far have already had. In the bottom 2, I see it for Daya, strictly for her runway, and probably Bosco because they're friends. And I just don't imagine that Bosco's energy of being fierce and fabulous would work in a Camp as Hell, Herp the Derp type song like all of these were. And since they've theoretically been each other's rocks all season and maybe have had a lot more storyline about that, Drag Race would manipulate that in some way, as they often do. And again, I just don't see Bosco being doofy enough to break away from her character. While I think that Lydia would not be phenomenal here, I think her runway would be a more interesting take on Miley than what the others would do, so it would probably save her from a bottom 2 placement. The lip sync song is See You Again. And I feel like this should have been Hoedown Throwdown. Somebody said that it was originally supposed to be that, but Ginger didn't know the song, so they switched it. Don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard. This feels like a song that either one of them could slay, so it really goes down to who has more to give to the competition. And I think that person is Bosco. She has way more story potential, and I think she's a stronger lip syncer in my opinion. So, Daya is sent back to the house. And Daya is extremely likely to get picked as the wildcard queen. That brings us to episode 11, the Hoop Queen's Makeover. This is the final competitive episode of the season before the lip sync smackdown, which I think was a mistake. I think probably the lip sync should have been somewhere else, and just been a compulsory lip sync episode with multiple queens in it, and then the finale be something completely different. But again, this isn't my fantasy. I complained originally that the makeover was way too early in the season. I like when they're later on, and I think it works better here. They're more satisfying near the end because we've gotten to firmly establish our main players before introducing external players into this that are only there for one episode. Bringing these girls in so early into the competition, I think kind of threw off a little bit of the energy that went from orange to pink, in my opinion. And I think a makeover is good for the last competitive episode. I think the top two would be very clearly Irene for her strong visual branding, because the makeover, at the end of the day, is a visual branding challenge. And I think, honestly, Acid could also get another win over Bosco. Because I think that what Acid really needs is a redemption from not really having a win since the beginning of the season. And that would start to play in, I think, about now. The girl that says, I haven't had a win in so long, I need one, going into the finale. I think this would be that time. Call me crazy, I'm going off book. I'm giving the stars to Irene and Acid. And then I think the three that would struggle the hardest would be Aja, because they did not connect with her original makeover at all, even if she loved it. I think Ginger, for obvious reasons. Even though this challenge theoretically doesn't require sewing and nobody's boobs would get hot glued together like one super massive boob. And I think that Georges, Lydia, and Denali would also struggle a bit. So I'm trying to work out what would happen here. I think it makes the most sense that Georges would fail to identify a visual brand enough to put that on someone else. Because when I think about what Georges' brand is, I get panties and bras and bodysuits, and we've seen how that doesn't work for queens in the past, that aesthetic just doesn't translate to someone else. And while I think that Lydia could identify her brand better than someone like Georges or even Denali, her budget I don't think would accommodate for creating something identical that would fit on someone else, and I don't think her tailoring skills would be strong enough to be able to fit that onto someone else. So I almost see this being like a Nina Bonina situation where the person that has the strongest personal visual brand is unable to stamp that onto another person. And so I kind of want to go crazy here and put Rue's favorite twinks together in a lip sync, Georges and Lydia. And the lip sync song is Pocketbook, where I completely see Georges winning this, sadly, sniping Lydia out right before the finale. So here are the final scorecards. Aja has 2 stars, Bosco has 1 star. Irene has 4 stars, Acid has 2 stars, Ginger has 4 stars, Georges has 1 star, and Denali has 2 stars. For the wild card queen, I see 1 vote for Carrie Colby. Because of the main reason I stated in my original reviews is that she's not a strong lip syncer, so it's an easy person to bring in to snipe out in round 1 to ensure that someone else moves forward. I think mechanically that makes her the most viable to choose, and someone like Michelle, who's plugged in on the TV-ness of it all, would choose Carrie's name. I see 1 vote for Lydia because she just came back from season 17 and presented a very strong package in All Stars 10, and I could see the judges wanting to reward that with 1 final chance. Plus, she's a great lip syncer and it would be fun to watch her. And I see 1 vote for Daya, purely for story reasons, so they could put her with Bosco and have Bosco eliminate her 1 more time. It's cruel and unusual, but Drag Race loves to do that shit. The super totally random, definitely not set up ball chooses Daya Betty. I don't think it's necessary at this point to bring Carrie back in, because I mean, she had a lot of season to show what she had and didn't really ever reach the levels that she promised she was going to, where Daya just had 1 bad day, didn't necessarily have bad drag, so she gets another opportunity. I mentioned that the stars would be important for something, and that is whoever has the top stars, that being Irene and Ginger, get to choose their song no matter how the names are chosen for who's lip syncing where. Rated Queen comes back, which I think was completely unnecessary, but based on that, I made some rankings on how I think this would go. Ginger is ranked as 1, Georges is ranked as number 2, Denali is ranked number 3, Bosco is ranked number 4, Daya is ranked number 5, Aja is ranked number 6, Irene is ranked number 7, and Acid Betty is ranked number 8. So if we pull the exact same stunts that were done in the finale, Ginger gets to choose her lip sync song. She is paired up with Acid Betty and chooses the song Disease. I do think that Acid would be really interesting to watch here, and they would have to do a lot of editing tricks to not show what she was doing so that Ginger could win it. But Ginger ultimately does win that. Bosco and Daya are paired up with Bosco choosing the song, Show Me How You Burlesque, and she wipes the floor with Daya. Georges and Irene are paired up together, and since Irene has the most stars, she gets to choose her song. I am gonna go off book just a little bit here, because I think that could be a slight advantage against Georges. Based on her look, I could see Irene choosing Raise Your Glass, and I don't see Georges performing so excellently here over Irene. This seems kind of in line with how Irene lip syncs. And I think there would be something silly about Irene maybe miming the Raise Your Glass, and then she's got her fingers in some invisible glass or maybe a real glass that she had with her. And I think it's possible that Irene could beat Georges. Realistically, I think producers would have pushed Georges through no matter what. But for this very last segment, since it's all fake and Georges has had kind of an up and down trajectory, I'm gonna say that Irene gets pushed to the next round. Because if they have two queens with 4 stars each, and then they can establish that one of them was the dominating queen and the other one wasn't, I feel like Drag Race would go for that. Kind of like what they did with Monet and Trinity. These two very high scorers in All Stars 7, but they ultimately wanted Monet in the last round more than they wanted Trinity. And then the final pairing is between Denali and Aja. I imagine that both balls would have Aja's name on them, Aja would get picked, and would probably choose Party Lights, since she was practically dressed for the assignment. The judges don't respond well or positively to the way that Denali lip syncs, and I think that Aja did a genuinely really fantastic job originally, and so I see Denali being eliminated and Aja moving to the next round. So then for our second round, we have Ginger and Bosco, which I think was super unfair to begin with. I really wish that Bosco had made the finale. In my fantasy, Bosco would beat Ginger. However, this time, the song that Ginger originally picked is not in this lineup. So then I look at the playlist and I think, what would Ginger pick? I think it's possible that she would choose Joyride over Whenever Wherever because it is a much campier song and it's something she could be silly to. Point over to Bosco like, oh girl, I can't do that either, but I can do this. I want it to be known that I think it should be Bosco, but it very likely would be Ginger to get pushed through because she was always on the mood board to be the finalist, I think. Kind of like a jinx. Didn't matter that Monet beat her in that last lip sync, she was always meant to go there. And then the final lip sync is Irene and Aja to Whenever Wherever. And while I am personally rooting for Irene, I do feel like this would be Aja's win. She's just a technically better dancer than Irene, and I think she would have a more interesting presentation, meaning that It's Raining Men is between Ginger and Aja. In my fantasy, I kind of see this as being a I need a hero moment for Aja, where she can apply so much energy and spark to this song. I do think that they wanted Ginger to ultimately win the whole thing, but I think it would be a very, very difficult decision not to give it to Aja. I think she's got good storyline through the competition, and she's got that underdog thing that Drag Race loves to reward. However, bringing Ginger back a 4th time to not crown her, I think would be kind of crazy. However, I do think it would be hilarious if Ginger loses to yet another trans person. Because Violet is NB, therefore under the trans umbrella. Kylie being a trans woman and Aja being a trans woman would be kind of iconic that Ginger lost to trans people 3 times. And I think it would be more satisfying if someone else won over Ginger. So now that this is over, I must say, this was a lot. Please be kind in the comments because I spent way more time constructing this season than I want to admit. Like literal hours and hours went into this. So many different constructions of it to try and make it work. I had to avoid my own biases so hard, even though they slipped through I think a few times. I really tried to put my head into what I think the producers were trying to do with this season and how it all would have shooken out if everyone was there from the jump to the end. I think Ginger's win is a little unsatisfying in any universe because we can see it happening from the promo. And that's not to discredit her win, it's just to be objective. I do think this run feels slightly more satisfying because we get to see other competitors do well and get their flowers in challenges where Ginger was getting the flowers exclusively. And in a year, we'll all have moved on from this moment and we'll have another All-Stars to be upset about. Who were you rooting for this season to win the whole thing? And I hope to see a lot of Nicole Paige Brooks from Atlanta, Georgia. If you sat through this entire video, thank you for watching. This was a project of love. Thank you for watching and I will see you all on the flip.